What's going on, fish nerds? Carlos here, and today I'm going to show you the different aquarium snails that I have out here in my fish room and how I take care of them. And also make sure you stay tuned to the end of the video for details about the 1,000 subscriber giveaway. I'm giving away t-shirts and an aquarium co-op gift card, so stay tuned. So let's just start here in the 40 breeder that is the most overrun with snails of all my tanks. And this gets comments basically every time I show this. But there are so many Malaysian trumpet snails in this tank. I mean, you can see it's just inches thick in this pile of snails right here. They're just all over the place, and they're all through this thick carpet of algae. They're just everywhere. And the reason there are so many of these snails in here are because I feed this tank a lot, because I have the bristlenose plecos in here, and I'm trying to get them to breed as much as possible, and so I'm feeding a lot of green beans. So the plecos, they'll eat a lot, but they're not necessarily the fastest eaters. So the snails have plenty of opportunity to eat on these green beans just as much as the plecos do, so they get all over the green beans, they get plenty full, and the more these snails eat, the bigger they get, the faster they grow, and the faster they breed. The more you feed snails, the more they will breed, and the faster they'll breed. So that's what's going on in this tank, and it's kind of a catch-22 or a downward spiral, where the more snails there are, the more they compete with the plecos for food. So the more I have to feed to make sure the plecos get some, so the more food the snails get, so the more snails I end up with, so the more I have to feed. So this tank, it's actually gotten out of control. I need to get a bunch of these Malaysian trumpet snails out of this tank so that they're not out competing my plecos for food. And it's just gonna be a job and a hassle to get the population down to where I need it to be, just simply because I don't want to put anything like a puffer in here to take these out, because one, I've got small pleco fry all over the place in this tank, and two, I've got the cherry shrimp in this tank, and I don't want those to become snacks. And I could put a snail trap in here. I've got a Sarah snail trap that's pretty effective. I did a review on it. The problem is with these little pleco fry, they're small enough to get in there with the snails, and I don't want to trap my little pleco fry in the snail trap. So that's why I can't use that. So I can't use a big predator, I can't use the snail trap. My only option really, other than moving everything that I want to keep into another tank and then just breaking this all down, is just to get handfuls of these guys. Just, you know, throw some green beans like this in there as bait, and as the snails pile in, just grab handfuls of them and just pull them out of the tank. So just some more general information about these Malaysian trumpet snails. They are actually live bearers. They do not lay eggs. They will burrow down into the substrate, and they will have up to 70 babies at a time, depending on how large the adult is. And so that's why they are very rapid multipliers. Possibly the most rapid multiplier of all the freshwater aquarium snails. If you have a planted tank, they can actually be pretty beneficial, because they do burrow down into the substrate, and if you have several of them digging in and out of your substrate, they're actually very good for aerating your substrate for your plant roots, which is a benefit. And they do not eat live plants. They tend to leave healthy plants completely alone. They are omnivores, and they'll eat pretty much anything that falls to the bottom, whether it's a dead leaf from one of your plants, or whether it's fish poop or leftover food or anything that's laying on the bottom. They'll eat it. If a fish dies and you've got plenty of these snails, they may have the fish eaten before you can get it netted out. They are hearty eaters for sure. Now this tank is another one that gets a lot of comments over the amount of snails in this tank. But with this tank, I have this many snails on purpose. I've been breeding these blue Ramshorn snails and selling them, so I actually wanted them to produce in here. The problem is they actually produce so quickly, and I got so many of them, that they were competing for calcium. There were so many that there wasn't enough calcium in my water to support all of them and how quickly they were growing and how quickly they were breeding. And that's why so many of these look like they're just coated in that crusty white stuff. You can see the contrast right here. The one on the left is a nice blue color like he ought to be, and then the one right next to it is just that crusty, chalky white color because of a calcium deficiency. There wasn't enough calcium in this tank to support the number of snails that I was growing in here. So I've been doing two things to remedy the calcium problem in this tank. One, I added a bunch of crushed coral back here in this corner of the tank. So that's going to add some more calcium to the tank. They can eat right off of the crushed coral if need be, and that's going to leach calcium into the water, which is going to be good for these guys. But also, I've been taking handfuls of snails out of this tank to reduce the population, and I've either been feeding them to my assassin snail colony or to my turtles. My turtles love these guys. They go crazy for them. So I've been doing that to reduce the population, and it seems to be working. A lot of the younger snails in this tank are looking a lot better than their older counterparts, and I am seeing a lot of improvement in the health of the shells on these guys. You can see back here, these guys look a lot better than the ones around them. So it is imperative if you're going to be keeping snails, they do need calcium in the water, especially if you're going to be breeding them or keeping very many of them. They do require calcium in the water. So harder water is going to be great for these guys. And most of these snails that I'm showing you, they can handle anywhere from, you know, a neutral to a, you know, alkaline pH, harder water. These Ramshorn snails, however, are not live bearers like the Malaysian trumpet snails. They are egg layers. So they'll lay these little egg sacs that are made of kind of like a jelly substance that have these little eggs in it. These little, you can see each of those little white dots there is its own egg covered in this jelly sac, and they'll lay those on the aquarium glass, on driftwood, rocks, pretty much any surface in the tank. These guys are plant safe, just like the Malaysian trumpet snails, so they look great and are a great part of your cleanup crew in a planted tank. However, they are not substrate diggers like the Malaysian trumpet snails. They're not going to burrow down into the substrate and aerate the substrate like the Malaysian trumpet snails will. This guy down here in the crayfish tank is an excellent example of what this blue variety of the Ramshorn snail should look like when it's got a healthy shell. This guy just looks great. I love that blue color. And up here in my fantasy blue Neocaridina tank, I do have blue rabbit snails. These guys I think are really sharp looking. He's got the two-tone look. That's why I went for the blue rabbit snails, because the back half of his shell is that nice cream color with that really dark front half. It's a really sharp looking snail. These guys are shaped like the Malaysian trumpet snails, only they are a lot larger than the Malaysian trumpet snail. They are also live bearers, the same as the Malaysian trumpet snails. However, there is a difference in that the trumpet snails will burrow into the substrate and have up to 70 teeny tiny little babies at a time. These guys will give birth to a relatively large baby snail one at a time. So they are not necessarily the fastest breeding snail. They tend to not start breeding until they're about 1.5 inches long and having, you know, one, and I think maybe sometimes two babies at a time. They're not going to overrun your tank in a hurry by any means whatsoever. There are also distinct males and females with these, whereas, you know, with the Malaysian trumpet snails and the Ramshorn snails, they can be male or female, whichever one. These guys, that's either a male or it's a female. They are not able to serve both roles in that. So you do need to have at least one male and one female in order to get these guys to breed. They're actually large enough and attractive enough to actually serve as a nice point of interest in the tank rather than just a boring part of the cleanup crew. They can actually, you know, be something that you enjoy looking at and like, oh, that's a nice looking snail. Lastly, in this tank, I've got my breeding colony of Assassin Snails. Now, everybody seems to be interested in Assassin Snails because they eat other snails. And a lot of people, they'll get Ramshorn Snails breeding in their display tank, or they'll get Malaysian Trumpet Snails, or you know, pond snails, bladder snails, and they want something that's going to get rid of those snails because they don't like them, they think they're ugly, or for whatever reason. And so they turn to these guys, the Assassin Snail. And these guys have a really unique look. They've got that spiral, you know, dark brown contrasted with yellow. So just a nice looking snail to begin with. But they also serve the purpose of keeping the snail population of your other species of snails down. And you can see in this tank, there's just a graveyard of Ramshorn snail shells. Because what I feed these guys, I just take a handful at a time of Ramshorn snails and dump them into this tank. And that's what these Assassin Snails want to eat. Now, if you have them alone, you don't have other snails to feed them, you can feed them other protein-rich foods. You can feed them shrimp pellets, they like that. They are opportunistic feeders. They will eat detritus from the bottom and things like that, but they do prefer a protein-rich diet because they are carnivores. If you have live blackworms and you feed them live blackworms, they'll eat those, same as they would snails. Bloodworms, if you have frozen bloodworms, you can feed those. But very protein-rich diet, especially if you want them to breed for you. These guys, as well as the rabbit snails, are male or female, so you have to have at least one of each. However, if you just get one from the store, if you say, well, I only got one, so I'm not going to get any eggs. If you got a female, she may very well have already made it at the store, and you may still end up with some baby Assassin Snails, which in my opinion isn't a problem because they breed so slowly that it's not like they're going to overrun your tank. And I actually tried for several months to get these guys to breed, and it just seemed like I couldn't get it to take off. I couldn't get these guys really started breeding in a tank. And I was giving them Ramshorn Snails, and you know, I had several different, you know, I had 5 to 7 of them, so there should have at least been one male, one female, and it just seemed like they weren't breeding for me at all until I added the Java moss to this tank. And I was talking to Rob from Flip Aquatics, and he said he just happened to throw it out there that he heard from somebody that they use spawning mops for these guys. And I already knew how they laid their eggs, but it just never occurred to me to add something like Java moss to the tank. But he said the reason they use those spawning mops is because the snails will go up in those spawning mops and they lay their eggs on the little strands. And so when I added the Java moss, that's when my breeding colony of these guys really started to take off. And I wish I could find some babies to show you guys. However, these guys do burrow down into the substrate just like the Malaysian Trumpet Snails. They'll actually burrow into your substrate looking for Malaysian Trumpet Snails. But actually, right here, it just looks like a little blurry dot on camera. I'm trying to get to focus. But that is a teensy tiny little baby Assassin Snail. That right there at the end of my finger, I wish it would focus, but that's a teeny tiny little Assassin Snail. Another one right there. The eggs these guys lay, if you can see that little small white papery looking thing that I'm having to keep refocusing on right there, that is an Assassin Snail egg. And so what it is just a small little paper filament. I say paper, but it's just thin like paper, like tissue paper that you can see through. It's just like a small little square sack that they attach to the little strands of this Java moss, and there'll be a single egg in that sack, and they'll lay those little eggs one at a time on the leaves of plants and things, and those will hatch out as these super teeny tiny little baby assassin snails. So even if you do get more of these than you want and they're having babies, you can generally just pick them out as you see them, and you may not completely eradicate them because they do burrow down into your substrate, but they're definitely not going to overrun your tank if you don't want them to. Also, real quick guys, I want to make sure I remind you about the 1,000 subscriber giveaway. I'll be giving away 3 Fish Nerd t-shirts as well as a $20 aquarium co-op gift card, so make sure you're entered to win. All you have to do is go to last week's video, which is the Mexican dwarf orange crayfish video, comment on that video and give it a thumbs up and be a subscriber. That's all you have to do to enter, and then make sure you hit the notification bell so that you don't miss the live stream when I choose the winners, which should be this Tuesday. I still have yet to schedule the live stream, but I'm planning on this coming Tuesday doing a live stream to run a random comment selector on that video to choose the winner. All that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video about the different aquarium snails that I have out here in my fish room, and if you did, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up, and I hope you'll join us again next week. I've got something planned if it works out. I'm excited to film it. I hope you'll be excited to see it too. But as always, you guys are awesome. God bless you, fish nerds. I'll see you next time.